This video is about the current conflict in Oregon between the Bundy militia group and BLM. I will review the first 5 amendments of the Constitution and comment on them. Amendment 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition a government for a redress of grievances. This first violation of the Constitution is in the freedom of peaceful assembly and the right to redress of grievances. Federal lands are not owned by a corporate entity. They are not for profit and not for occupation of federal troops. These federal lands are located in individual states under the authority and stewardship of that state. Taxpayers own the property. Therefore, taxpayers, i.e., American citizens and Indians by treaty, may occupy those lands without interference from the federal government. So, 1. When the FBI goes into the Oregon Wildlife Refuge for the purposes of a stakeout and spying on American citizens, this is a violation. 2. The Bundy Group took charge of it in protest and in redress of the grievances to the federal government, which the federal government is obliged to hear. And 3. Since these lands are in Oregon, they are under the direct control of the governor of Oregon, so the federal government is guilty of violating Amendment 10 of the Constitution as well. Amendment 2. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. There is a nightmare of violations in this scene. The first violation is that the militia group is not well regulated. A militia, as defined by our forefathers, is a group of trained men in a unit such as a squad, platoon, company, battalion, division, or regiment. These are both federally trained and state-trained groups. Constitutionally speaking, the state-trained militia groups are to work with the federally trained militia groups in maintaining our freedoms, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A state militia, however, has 2 jobs, like the governor. 1. To aid the federal government in suppressing insurrections and rebellions, and 2. To guard against federal overreach into state affairs. Both the state and federal militia groups are to get their authority from the state and federal constitutions. According to Amendment 10 of the Constitution, if the federal government is unwilling or unable to aid the state, the governor may order state militia groups and police to suppress acts of war and terrorism within its borders. Also, the governor may use state militia groups and police to suppress unconstitutional military federal invasion and must provide justification. Police chiefs are elected by the people and are paid by state and local taxes, and therefore their duties are to the American people abiding in that state, not to the federal government. The Bundy Group is not a trained state militia group under the jurisdiction of the governor, and it is not recognized by the federal government as such. It is not well regulated. That certainly is a violation to the first clause, a well-regulated militia. On the other hand, the Bundy Group, as private individuals and citizens of the U.S. and the state of Oregon, has the right to bear arms. However, private individuals that organize themselves as a militia must be recognized by the state as such. They are not. Hence, the need for state defense forces. They would be much like the National Guard or Reserves, train once a month for 3 days and paid by the state, and then they are called by the state into action and paid for their services. Otherwise, they are at their own jobs, living in their own cities, until that time comes. That is the difference between a legally armed individual and a recognized militia group. Oath keepers and promise keepers are not legally recognized by state or federal governments, nor Congress, Article 1, Section 8, and they are not paid. They cannot just take a month off work. Therefore, they are not valid militia. State police must be retrained. They do not answer to federal authority. They answer to the governor and the people abiding in the state. Amendment 3. No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in the time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. This amendment was inspired by the actions of King George of Great Britain prior to the nationhood of the United States. A federal asset such as the FBI, CIA, ATF, or any other federal law enforcement agency may not use private property, in this case a house or apartment dwelling, without express permission from the owner of the property. If the owner of the property agrees to it, then the owner is paid for the time of the occupation, and the family is housed in other accommodations if necessary and paid for. If it's an apartment dwelling, then the occupants must be put up in other accommodations if necessary, and the owner paid rent. Eminent domain is unconstitutional, and if the owner does not agree, then the owner cannot be evicted or removed forcefully, nor can any of his or her things be confiscated. If the Oregon Wildlife Refuge is occupied by law-abiding citizens and they happen to own property within it, then the FBI was an obvious violation of this constitutional provision. They cannot stake out or lie in wait for crimes to take place either. Amendment 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. These men were stopped on a road without suspicion, a warrant, and an unarmed man was murdered in cold blood. Ammon Bundy was shot in the arm by a federal agent. They were all illegally arrested. This is another clear violation of the Constitution. These men have the right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Furthermore, no crimes were committed, no suspicion of crimes being committed, and no warrant signed by a judge was issued. Therefore, BLM, FBI, ATF, and whoever the heck else was there are guilty of 4 violations and crimes against the Constitution: illegally stopping and arresting peaceful individuals, the murder of an unarmed man submitting to the authorities, illegal confiscation of property such as vehicles and personal property, and incarceration without probable cause and a warrant signed by a judge. Further, persons, houses, papers, and effects includes their physical bodies, houses, any papers that they may be carrying on their persons, and effects such as cars, motorcycles, RVs, trailers, safe deposit boxes, bank accounts, personal emails, phone calls, right down to the bicycle pouch. Amendment 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. The Bundy group was not indicted by a grand jury. They were not in the military, and they were not a public danger. Yet they were deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The rest of the amendments are supporting the first 5 amendments, which expressly forbid the federal and state governments from violating any person's constitutional rights. Our governing officials and police answer to the law of the land and the people. Their loyalty lies in upholding the Constitution and not in the illegal and unlawful orders of some old fart in Congress that wants to sell America to China. Senator Harry Reid. Thank you.